The words echoed through the dining room like a death sentence, and every single person at that table nodded in agreement. Every single person except me. My name is Dr. Alexandria, Alex Morrison, and at that moment, sitting at my own family's Thanksgiving dinner, I felt like the most worthless person alive. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a call I couldn't take, a call that would change everything. But let me start from the beginning, because this story isn't just about revenge. It's about the moment when truth becomes the most powerful weapon you've ever wielded. The Morrison family has always been about appearances. My father, Richard Morrison, owns a chain of successful car dealerships across 3 states. My mother, Patricia Morrison, is the queen bee of every charity organization and social club in our wealthy suburb of Westfield Heights. My brother Marcus is a partner at a prestigious law firm, and my sister Jennifer married into old money, the kind that comes with generational trust funds and country club memberships passed down like family heirlooms. And then there's me, the family disappointment. The one who threw away a perfectly good business degree to pursue idealistic nonsense in international relations and public policy. The one who moved to Washington, D.C. and lived in a tiny apartment instead of accepting Daddy's offer to join the family business. The one who dressed down, drove an old car, and apparently had nothing to show for my life except what they called government work, which they pronounced like it was some kind of communicable disease. Alex hasn't accomplished anything real, Jennifer was saying, cutting into her perfectly prepared turkey with surgical precision. She's 32 years old and still living like a college student. No house, no proper career, no husband, no children. It's honestly embarrassing. Marcus nodded sagely, adjusting his Rolex. I offered to get her an interview at my firm 3 years ago. She turned it down. Said she was committed to public service. You can't pay rent with good intentions, Alex. My phone buzzed again. I glanced at the screen discreetly, another call from a number I recognized but couldn't answer. Not here. Not now. I declined the call and looked back up to find everyone staring at me expectantly. Well, my mother demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Don't you have anything to say for yourself? Your cousins are all asking what you do for work, and I honestly don't know what to tell them. She works for the government sounds so vague, so unimpressive. I took a deep breath. This was the conversation we had every time I came home. Every holiday, every family gathering, every phone call. The constant questioning, the subtle, and not so subtle, put-downs, the endless comparisons to my siblings and cousins who had chosen more traditional, more lucrative, more socially acceptable career paths. I work in international policy, I said quietly, the same response I'd given for years. I help develop strategies for what? My father interrupted, leaning back in his chair with that dismissive look I knew so well. Alex, you're smart. You got good grades. You could have done anything with your life. Instead, you're pushing papers in some government cubicle, making what, $40,000 a year? Maybe 50? It's wasteful. It's selfish, actually, considering all the opportunities you've been given. My phone buzzed a third time. This time, I saw multiple missed calls from the same number and my stomach clenched. This wasn't normal. This wasn't something I could ignore. But I was trapped at this table, surrounded by people who saw me as nothing more than a cautionary tale about wasted potential. She probably doesn't even make 40,000, Jennifer laughed, the sound cold and cutting. Government salaries are pathetic. I spend more than that on handbags in a year. It's actually sad when you think about it. All that education, all those opportunities, and this is what she chose. It's not about the money, I tried to explain, but my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. How could I explain that some things mattered more than salary figures and status symbols? How could I make them understand that my work had meaning, even if I couldn't talk about most of it? Everything is about money, Alex, Marcus said with the condescending tone he'd perfected in law school. Money is security. Money is respect. Money is proof that you're contributing something valuable to society. What you're doing, it's like expensive charity work. It's not a real career. My mother reached across the table and patted my hand in a gesture that looked sympathetic but felt patronizing. Honey, we're not trying to be cruel. We love you. but we're worried about your future. You're not getting any younger, and you have nothing to show for your life. No assets, no stability, no prospects. It's time to grow up and make some practical decisions. My phone buzzed again, and this time it was followed immediately by a text message. I glanced down discreetly and saw the words that made my blood run cold. Urgent. Answer your phone. POTUS needs brief in 20 minutes. POTUS. President of the United States. The brief I'd been working on for 3 weeks, the crisis that had kept me up for the last 4 nights, the reason I'd almost canceled this trip home entirely. But I'd promised my family I'd be here. I'd promised I'd try to be normal, just for one day. Are you even listening to us? Jennifer's voice cut through my panic. This is exactly what we're talking about. You're completely checked out. You can't even focus on a simple family conversation. It's like you think you're too good for us now. I'm sorry, I said, slipping my phone back into my pocket. You were ignoring us, my father said flatly. Just like you've been ignoring our advice for years. Just like you've been ignoring reality. Alex, I'm going to be very direct with you because clearly, subtlety isn't working. You are 32 years old, and you have failed to launch. You're living in poverty, working a dead-end job, with no prospects for improvement. From where I'm sitting, you look exactly like someone who's given up on life. The words hit me like physical blows. Failed to launch. Given up on life. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, and I hated myself for it. I was stronger than this. I'd faced down foreign diplomats, hostile cabinet members, and international crises that could destabilize entire regions. But sitting at this table, surrounded by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, I felt like a child again. A disappointing, worthless child who couldn't do anything right. She's not even crying properly, Jennifer observed with clinical detachment. Look at her. She's just sitting there like she doesn't even care what we think. It's sociopathic, honestly. It's not sociopathic, Marcus corrected. It's resignation. She knows we're right, but she's too proud to admit she's wasted her life. Classic sunk cost fallacy. She's invested so much time in this fantasy career that she can't face the reality that it's going nowhere. My phone started ringing in my pocket. Not buzzing, ringing, with a special ringtone I'd assigned to exactly 3 numbers in my contacts. Numbers that meant drop everything, answer immediately, national security level importance. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I need to take this call, I said, starting to stand up. Absolutely not, my mother said sharply. We're having a family dinner. Whatever telemarketer or bill collector is calling you can wait until we're finished discussing your future. Mom, this is important, more important than your family, my father demanded. This is exactly the kind of selfish, irresponsible behavior we're talking about. You can't even give us 2 hours of your time without some crisis at your little government job pulling you away. The phone stopped ringing, then immediately started again. Turn it off, Jennifer commanded. Turn off your phone right now or leave. We're trying to help you here, Alex, but you have to be willing to listen. You have to be willing to admit that you need help. I looked around the table at their faces, disappointed, frustrated, angry, but also certain. Absolutely certain that they knew what was best for me, that they understood my life better than I did, that I was nothing more than a failure who needed to be saved from her own poor decisions. You want to know what I think? My mother continued, her voice taking on that lecturing tone I remembered from childhood. I think you're afraid. I think you're afraid of success, afraid of responsibility, afraid of growing up and joining the real world. It's easier to hide in some government office, pushing papers and pretending you're important, than it is to take real risks and build a real life. You're completely worthless, my father said, and the words landed with the finality of a judge's gavel. You contribute nothing to this family, nothing to society, nothing to yourself. You're 32 years old, and you have less to show for your life than most college graduates. It's pathetic, frankly. And then, as if summoned by some cosmic sense of timing, my phone rang again. But this time, it wasn't just ringing in my pocket. This time, the sound was coming from the front door. The doorbell. 3 long, formal chimes followed by a pattern of knocks that made my stomach drop to my knees. I knew that knock. I'd heard it exactly twice before in my life, and both times it meant the same thing, The situation had escalated beyond phone calls and text messages. "What in the world?" my mother muttered, standing up and smoothing her skirt. "We're not expecting anyone." "Richard, did you invite someone else?" My father shook his head, already moving toward the front door. The rest of the family followed, curious about the unexpected interruption to their systematic destruction of my self-esteem. I trailed behind, my heart hammering so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. My father opened the door, and I watched his face change from mild irritation to complete confusion. Standing on our front porch were two people in dark suits, a woman and a man, both with the kind of posture and alertness that screamed federal agent from a mile away. Behind them, partially visible from the doorway, was a black SUV with government plates. "Mr. Morrison?" the woman asked, holding up a badge that gleamed gold in the porch light. "I'm Agent Sarah Chin with the Secret Service. We're looking for Dr. Alexandria Morrison." "We understand she's here." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. My family turned to stare at me with identical expressions of complete bewilderment, as if I'd suddenly started speaking in tongues. "Secret Service?" my mother repeated faintly. "There must be some mistake. Alex works for. She does policy work. She's not." "Dr. Morrison," Agent Chin said, looking directly at me with the kind of professional courtesy reserved for people whose time is extremely valuable. "The White House has been trying to reach you. The president needs your briefing on the Southeast Asian situation immediately. We have a helicopter standing by to transport you back to D.C. "A helicopter? Standing by to transport me to brief the President of the United States." I stepped forward, my mind already shifting into crisis mode. "What's the current status? Has the situation in Thailand escalated?" "Yes, ma'am. The Prime Minister is requesting immediate consultation on the trade agreement modifications you proposed. Secretary of State Martinez is standing by for your recommendations." Secretary of State Martinez, one of the most powerful women in Washington, waiting for my recommendations. I pulled out my phone and saw 17 missed calls, 43 text messages, and 12 emails marked urgent. "I need 5 minutes to gather my materials," I said, my voice automatically taking on the calm, authoritative tone I used in briefings. "Agent Chin, please inform the Secretary that I'll be available for video conference during transport. The situation analysis is in my encrypted files." "Of course, Dr. Morrison. We've been instructed to provide you with secure communications during the flight." I turned back to my family, who were standing in the doorway like statues. My father's mouth was literally hanging open. My mother looked like she'd been struck by lightning. Marcus was staring at me like he'd never seen me before in his life, and Jennifer looked like she was going to be physically sick. "I have to go," I said simply. "There's an international crisis that requires my immediate attention." But you work for the government," my mother stammered. "You push papers. You said you do policy work." "I do policy work," I confirmed, grabbing my coat from the closet. "International policy. For the president. I'm the Senior Director of Asian Affairs for the National Security Council. I've been in this position for 3 years." The silence was deafening. "You briefed the president?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Every Tuesday and Friday, plus whenever there are developing situations that require immediate attention. Like today." I was already moving toward the stairs to grab my laptop bag from my old room. "Agent Chin, what's our ETA?" 15 minutes to the helicopter, 35 minutes flight time to the White House, Dr. Morrison. Dr. Morrison. Not Alex, not sweetheart, not the family disappointment. Dr. Morrison, spoken with the kind of respect usually reserved for people who make decisions that affect millions of lives. Because that's exactly what I am. I came back downstairs with my materials, and my family was still standing there like they'd been frozen in time. Agent Chin was speaking quietly into her earpiece, and I caught fragments. "Has the package en route in 10? "Yes, sir. She's confirmed the Thailand brief is ready." "Alex," my father said, and his voice sounded completely different than it had 5 minutes ago. "I don't understand. If you work for the president, why didn't you ever tell us? Why did you let us think?" "Let you think what, Dad?" I asked, shouldering my bag. Let you think I was worthless? Let you think I was a failure? Let you think I had nothing to show for my life? I looked around at their faces, shocked, confused, maybe even a little afraid. These people who had spent the last hour systematically tearing down my self-worth, who had called me worthless and pathetic and claimed I had given up on life. For the record, I said, my voice calm but carrying an edge they'd never heard before, my salary is $185,000 a year, plus security clearance bonuses and hazard pay for international assignments. I own a townhouse in Georgetown that's worth $1.2 million. I have a master's degree from Harvard and a PhD from Johns Hopkins. I speak 6 languages fluently and have been personally thanked by 3 foreign heads of state for preventing international incidents that could have led to economic collapse or military conflict. Jennifer made a small choking sound. I didn't tell you about my work because most of it is classified at levels you don't have clearance to know about. I didn't correct your assumptions because honestly, I didn't think it mattered. I thought you loved me regardless of what I did for a living. I thought family meant more than salary figures and status symbols. My mother reached out toward me, her face crumpling. Alex, sweetheart, we didn't know. You didn't know because you never asked, I said simply. You assumed. You decided who I was and what my life was worth based on appearances and incomplete information. And you know what? That's fine. That's your choice. But it's also information I'll remember. Agent Chin cleared her throat politely. Dr. Morrison, we really do need to move. The situation is developing rapidly. Of course. I turned back to my family one last time. I probably won't be able to make Christmas this year. The president is sending me to Seoul for emergency trade negotiations. But don't worry, I'm sure you'll find plenty to discuss without the family disappointment there to bring down the mood. I walked toward the door, then paused and looked back. Oh, and Marcus? That job offer at your law firm? I make more in 6 months than most partners there make in a year. But thank you for thinking of me. The helicopter ride back to Washington was surreal. As Agent Chin had promised, I had secure communications during the flight, and I spent the 35 minutes briefing Secretary Martinez on the developing situation in Thailand while simultaneously reviewing updated intelligence reports from our embassy in Bangkok. Excellent work on the preliminary analysis, Alex, Secretary Martinez said over the encrypted video call. The president specifically requested you for this briefing because he trusts your assessment of the regional implications. The president specifically requested me. The leader of the free world knew my name, trusted my judgment, valued my expertise enough to interrupt my family holiday with a helicopter escort. When we landed at the White House, I was escorted directly to the Situation Room, where I spent the next 4 hours in meetings with cabinet-level officials, foreign ambassadors, and policy experts from 3 different agencies. My recommendations became the foundation for a joint statement that potentially prevented a trade war that could have cost both countries billions of dollars and thousands of jobs. It was nearly midnight when I finally made it back to my townhouse in Georgetown, my $1.2 million townhouse that my family assumed I couldn't afford. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in my home office, surrounded by framed photos of me with world leaders, commendations from foreign governments, and my diplomas from Harvard and Johns Hopkins. My phone buzzed with a text message from my mother. Alex, please call us. We need to talk. We had no idea about your work. We're so sorry. We're so proud of you. Followed by another from Jennifer. I can't believe you work at the White House. Why didn't you ever tell us? This changes everything. And one from Marcus. I Googled you. There are news articles about your work on international trade agreements. You've been quoted in the Washington Post 17 times. I'm an idiot. And finally, one from my father. I owe you the biggest apology of my life. I called you worthless, and you're one of the most important people in the country. I don't know how to make this right. I set the phone aside without responding. Because the truth was, it didn't change everything. It changed their perception of my worth, but it didn't change who they were or how they thought. They weren't apologizing because they realized they'd been cruel. They were apologizing because they realized they'd been wrong about my status and income. If I'd been exactly who they thought I was, a low-level government employee making $40,000 a year, living in a tiny apartment, struggling to make ends meet, Would their words have been any less devastating? Would their judgment have been any less harsh? Would I have deserved to be called worthless simply because I hadn't achieved their definition of success? The answer, of course, was no. But it had taken a helicopter from the White House to make them see it. Over the next few weeks, the calls and texts continued. My family was suddenly intensely interested in my work, my life, my opinions. They wanted to know about my job, my house, my income, my proximity to power. They wanted to brag about me to their friends, to include me in their social gatherings, to show me off like a trophy they'd discovered in their attic. But the damage was done. I couldn't unhear the words, completely worthless. I couldn't forget the collective nodding when my father declared that I had nothing to show for my life. I couldn't pretend that their sudden respect and interest were based on love rather than status. When Christmas came, I was indeed in Seoul, negotiating a trade agreement that would affect both countries for the next decade. I spent Christmas Eve in meetings with Korean officials and Christmas Day writing policy recommendations that would be implemented by both governments within the month. My family sent cards and gifts and messages saying they missed me, that they wished I could be there, that they were proud of my important work. But I noticed they didn't say they were sorry for calling me worthless. They didn't acknowledge that their love had been conditional on achievements and income levels. They didn't seem to understand that the person they'd rejected at Thanksgiving dinner was the same person they now wanted to claim as their own. 6 months later, I was promoted to Deputy National Security Advisor, making me one of the youngest people ever to hold that position. The promotion came with a salary increase to $230,000 a year, a larger office in the West Wing, and direct daily access to the president. My family was ecstatic. They called and texted and sent flowers. They planned a celebration dinner. They told everyone they knew about their daughter/sister who worked directly for the president, who had the president's ear, who was involved in the most important decisions facing the country. But I remembered the Thanksgiving dinner when they declared me completely worthless. I remembered their faces when they systematically destroyed my self-esteem based on assumptions and appearances. I remembered how quickly their love had evaporated when they thought I was unsuccessful. And I realized that the most important lesson from that day wasn't about my work or my achievements or my success. It was about the difference between conditional and unconditional love, between people who value you for who you are and people who value you for what you can do for their reputation. The White House had called that day, but the real revelation wasn't about my job title or my salary or my proximity to power. The real revelation was about my family and the conditions they placed on their love and respect. That was worth more than any briefing I'd ever given, any crisis I'd ever managed, or any policy I'd ever written. Because now I knew exactly who they were. And more importantly, I knew exactly who I was, with or without their approval. Today, 2 years later, I still work at the White House. I've been promoted again, this time to National Security Advisor, making me the youngest person ever to hold that position. I brief the president every morning at 7 a.m. I travel with him on Air Force One. I've been in the room for decisions that will shape history. My family still calls regularly. They're still proud, still eager to brag about my achievements, still fascinated by my proximity to power. But our relationship has never fully recovered from that Thanksgiving dinner, and I don't think it ever will. Because I learned something important that day. Respect that comes only after success isn't really respect at all. Love that depends on achievements isn't really love. And family that calls you worthless until the White House calls isn't really family in the way that matters most. The irony, of course, is that they were wrong about everything except one thing. I am completely different from them. But not in the way they meant. I'm different because I learned to value people for who they are, not what they achieve. I'm different because I understand that worth isn't measured in salary figures or status symbols. I'm different because I know the difference between conditional and unconditional love. And that, more than any White House appointment or presidential briefing, is the achievement I'm most proud of. The White House still calls. But now I know who I am even when it doesn't.